Hello, I'm Jim Cornwall, and this is the WalkingPost.com podcast. WalkingPost.com is the news website dedicated to walking, with all the latest on trails, health, books, gear, fitness, festivals, events, and more. This podcast is number 24, and it's going out on August the 15th. Bit of a heat wave here in Scotland and other places too. It was 27 yesterday when we were out filming. It looked like it was going to be a terrible day, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. Interesting that some places in Canada have banned walking in the woods due to the increased risk of forest fires. And then of course you get the "you can't tell me what to do" folks, who are now angry. It shouldn't really be an issue, because if people were 100% responsible, there wouldn't be a chance of a forest fire. And 99% of people are responsible. But it only takes one selfish or careless person to destroy hundreds of acres. Funnily enough, while we were walking, I got a message about a flood warning, which had been rescinded. No kidding. Lots of police around here today, as well as JD Vance is in Ayrshire. During the week we went to Northern Ireland and did some walking there. I've been to a few places around Belfast, but this time it was for pleasure and not to do interviews, so we had a chance to do most of the Causeway Coast. Some breathtaking scenery there, that's for sure, and it should be on everybody's bucket list if they have the opportunity. I don't have time to do the entire Ulster Way because it's extremely long, but I expect it's amazing in its entirety. I totally forgot to tell you what August the 15th is. It is India Independence Day. It's also Liechtenstein's National Day, and it is Acadian Day, as well as Lemon Meringue Pie Day. And it's also a good one, Relaxation Day. If only. It's also the day in 1863 that Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen was opened, for birthdays, Napoleon and Princess Anne, among others. Last week on the podcast we talked about dinosaur trails in Leicestershire and an 8-day, 80-mile walking challenge in Somerset. This week it's a new trail at a Roman site in North Yorkshire, and we're also talking about Coolcations. And if you don't know what they are, stay tuned. And just so you know, a Coolcation isn't when you go on holiday wearing designer sunglasses, a thick gold chain and your hat on backwards. But of course, first we take our usual look at some of the week's articles over on WalkingPost.com. If you have news, guest ideas or subjects to cover, or comments, or if you want to advertise, please do get in touch via WalkingPost.com. Or you can just email me directly at jim@walkingpost.com. Alright, let's go through some of the headlines of the news articles you may have missed that we had on walkingpost.com this past week. A new study says walking further and faster reduces the risk of heart attacks. RAB opened a new store in Colorado, and the Canadian province of Nova Scotia banned hiking in the woods due to the forest fire threat. Salomon opened a store in Shanghai, a popular Derbyshire walking festival is back, and a Kansas Park Trail received a US Hall of Fame honour. The very popular Connick Hill in Scotland is now more accessible thanks to a path upgrade. Cornwall is looking for public input on its paths, and you can read all of these and more at www.walkingpost.com. So that brings us to the first feature on this week's podcast. If you read the WalkingPost.com news site often, you may remember a couple of weeks ago an article about a new trail opening in North Yorkshire related to Romans. What have they ever done for us, I hear you ask? Well, they left some fascinating history for a start, and now there's the 1-mile Edge of Empire Trail at Cawthorn Roman Camps. To tell us more are Nick Mason, Archaeology Officer at the North York Moors National Park Authority, and Jacob Lawson, Conservation Officer also at the North York Moors National Park Authority. And other than my question, the first person you will hear from is Nick. So maybe to get things started then, I wonder if you could give us a bit of history about the Roman camps itself, kind of take us back 2,000 years.
Yeah, sure. So Cawthorn Camps is the largest Roman site in the North York Moors. We believe it originates from around about 70 to 80 AD, so back in the first century. In short, the Romans crossed the River Humber and founded what is now the city of York in around about the year 71, is the general understanding. And then we think not long after that, they started heading north into what was Brigantes territory. The tribe at the time was known as the Brigantes, we think, in this area. And Cawthorn is on a line between what's now Malton and we think probably somewhere up on the coast. So they were probably operating out of Whitby as well, although there's not much direct archaeological evidence for Romans at Whitby. There is another smaller fort at Lease Rig, which is the hills above Goathland. And between Cawthorn and Goathland, we think there's a Roman road. A lot of people do call it a Roman road. The evidence for that is a bit all over the place. I think on reflection, it's likely to have been used by the Romans, but it was probably already there prior to them as well. Anyway, Cawthorn is a camp. We call it the Roman Camps because it's a very large military site. It consists of 4 enclosures, one of which is referred to as a temporary camp. 2 are referred to as forts, and a further is an annex to one of those forts, so an extension essentially. And the evidence at the moment points to them having all been built through a couple of different phases of activity between about 80 AD, as I say, and then up to around about 120 AD. So really a relatively short period of time. The finds peter out at about 120. There's nothing dated after that, but we don't know for sure that they're abandoned after that. And actually, I think it's likely that in dribs and drabs it was used after that. For a lot of the last century, it's been interpreted as a Roman training camp. So a place where legionaries were trained in the art of constructing forts. We don't think that's necessarily the case now. Some of the interpretations changed after excavations in 1999 and 2000. And we think they actually probably were supposed to be a bit more, they were solid, permanent structures. Some bits of it do remain a bit of a mystery, I have to say. And if you visit the site, you'll see this. There's one main fort, the western end, which is your stereotypical Roman fort. It's got 4 sides. It's got 4 corners. It's got 3 gates. It doesn't have a gate on the northern edge because there's a sheer drop down there. So it sits on a large cliff edge, essentially, and has a great view to the north, looking over some of the moors. So it's your classic military installation, really, defensive location. But immediately to the east of that, there's a very unusual fort, I think unique in certainly in England in its shape. It's shaped like a coffin, and it doesn't have that outlook. It's set back from the cliff edge, not a typical defensive location. And there's quite a few unanswered questions about that, which we'd like to get to the bottom of one day. And then a few hundred yards to the east, there's a further fort with a large extension on it as well. There must have been Romans in number there at some point. What they were doing is a good question. Whether it is simply somewhere to stop as you're marching between Malton and the Whitby area, or whether it's something built more as a serious military site to control the local tribes.
Would that have been the northernmost extent at some point, and then they would have moved on from there?
It's tempting to think that would be a front line at some point. We don't have evidence for that. But at some point, presumably that was the furthest north the Romans were, but probably not for very long. I mean, one of the interpretations is that you've got this tribe called the Brigantes who, until about 70 AD, are relatively friendly to the Roman presence in Britain. But then they essentially start rebelling, and that's why the Romans cross the River Humber and move to invade them and pacify the area. There is another tribe in east of Yorkshire called the Parisi, and it may also have been that those 2 tribes were fighting each other and the Romans were there as a kind of peacekeeping force, and so that's what Cawthorn represents initially. If you ask me, it's a seriously large site, but I think there must have been some good reason for it being there.
What's its significance historically? Because we hear about Hadrian's Wall and we hear about some of the other major sites. How important is it?
I suppose it's not as significant as Hadrian's Wall in the sense that Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine Wall further north are the furthest extents of the Roman Empire's control at those periods. But it's probably underappreciated when you compare it to other forts in Britain. It's been relatively understudied. And although there have been excavations, notably in the 1920s, the Yorkshire Archaeological Society did a number of excavations, and then again by as was English Heritage at the turn of the millennia. But apart from that, there's a lot of unanswered questions there, and I think it's a very significant site. It's owned by the National Park Authority, purely based on the archaeological significance, and I would encourage people to visit to make more of the site. We're very keen to show it off.
All right. Are there still excavations going on or investigations?
No, nothing currently. No archaeological investigation going on currently. But as I say, a lot of unanswered questions, and we would hope to in the future.
I know the press release mentioned an experimental temporary camp, which sounds pretty intriguing. What was that?
That's what they're referring to with this coffin-shaped camp. I don't want to sound like the sun, but I suppose it's baffled experts in the past. We don't know why it's positioned where it is. We don't know why it's the shape it is. It's certainly not dictated by the local geology or anything like that. So presumably it's the shape and the location of it is dictated by other activities that the Romans are up to at the time, but that we can't see in surviving earthworks. So excavation in the future may tell us more about why it's there. The likelihood is, I think, that it's a temporary camp for the builders of the larger or proper Roman camps, Roman forts adjacent to it, but there's really not much evidence either way. The site as a whole is unusual because there's one major disadvantage to it, being that there's no supply of water there. So, were you to get besieged on that site, you'd be in trouble. There's no water accessible. So, yeah, as I say, there's just a lot of unanswered questions.
As far as visitors, could you tell me a bit about the administration of it and some of the logistics, like when you can visit and when it's open and whether it's free, those kind of things?
Yeah, the site is free to access, but there is a small charge for parking our car park on the site. But if you're walking, obviously it's completely free. The access is only one way. You walk through the car park, through a wooded area, and then you can access what we call the Edge of Empire Trail, which will take you on a guided walk throughout some of those Roman camps and tell you a bit more about the Roman background of the site.
And where would the nearest place that people would have heard of be?
Probably Pickering. The town of Pickering on the A170, sometimes called the Gateway to the Moors.
And could you tell me a bit about the Edge of Empire Trail and how that came about?
Yeah, so that's something the National Park Authority was looking to do over the last year, and I think we've been very successful in it. We wanted to update the interpretation and visitor experience at the camps because there was a guided trail, but you had to have a copy of a guidebook to follow that trail. And now a lot of that information in that guidebook is now on interpretation boards around the site and on maps positioned around the site. All of the fresh new design and including some of the new information that we got from those excavations at the turn of the millennia, alongside some new interpretive artwork.
Do you do anything like QR codes and those things to websites or audio tours? Or
there's a web page for the Edge of Empire Trail, which will describe it better than I've just done. I think links to a digital copy of the walk and other walks in the area, but we haven't used QR codes this time around, I don't think.
Obviously, you want people to visit, but could you kind of talk me through a little bit about what it looks like when you get there? Or how long is it, and is it circular or linear? Or?
The Edge of Empire Trail is roughly 1 mile if you were going from the car park back to the car park, and it's a circular loop. You can go either way around it, but obviously I recommend following the Edge of Empire Trail signs, then you'll get the best interpretation of the Roman activity on site. It's pretty easy going. Most of it's a gravel path. There's not much elevation. It's designed hopefully to be accessible to most people, and there is a spur at the far northern end when you're just on the edge of one of the major Roman encampments with a modern viewing platform that looks out over a large area of the North Yorkshire moors.
I guess one of the other interesting things about the press release was goats. Could you tell me a bit about the Royal Guernsey goats that are there?
I'll tell you a bit about the goats from the archaeological perspective, and then I'll let Jacob talk about them from a conservation, more of a conservation-led perspective. Maintaining the Roman site up there is a bit like painting the Forth Bridge. It is a non-stop battle against invasive vegetation. In particular, young trees seeding themselves, particularly birch trees, holly trees, and that kind of thing, and bracken and brambles to a certain extent as well. All of those flora are potentially damaging in their root systems to very delicate archaeology. So we want to protect that as much as we can. And for the past 15, 20 years, we've been using some of the national park volunteers who are absolutely fantastic in the efforts and the lengths they go to be up there bashing bracken and cutting down young trees and that kind of thing on the site. But as I say, it's painting the fourth bridge. It will go on forever and ever. Jacob had the fantastic idea to introduce some goats to the site as a form of conservation grazing, and the goats absolutely love eating, in particular, the young regenerating trees, which is hugely beneficial to the site, and remove some of the other works that we have to do. So really, from my perspective, it's about maintaining the archaeological integrity of the site.
How is that done logistically? I mean, are they kept away from people? Are they fenced in areas that then move, or how do you manage that?
That's a great question, and I'll let Jacob answer it because it's more his domain than mine. That's Jacob.
Yeah, so currently we're using a no fence system. So if anyone goes up and sees the goats, they'll notice they have collars on, which essentially act like an invisible electric fence. The goats learn off an audible cue, and that essentially keeps them within the bounds. So we've split the area into like 4 compartments with sort of the 4 distinct sets of earthworks that we've got on site to sort of concentrate the grazing a little bit more. But no, they generally have free rein. I think the only place they were excluded from was sort of the entrance to the boardwalk because they could potentially block people on the viewing platform from getting off it. It's generally been pretty good. The goats are incredibly friendly, so we haven't had any problems on that side. Almost too friendly because ideally we don't want people to be sort of trying to handle the goats. The goat keepers, Mossy Oaks, are quite keen on people not trying to go up and stroke and handle them, but it is quite difficult because when we've been up on site, the goats will come and stand next to you expecting some attention, which is quite difficult to sort of say no sometimes.
So you don't own the goats or anything, they kind of like leased or...
Yes, so they come from a company called Mossy Oaks based at Conisthorpe near Castle Howard, and they've got one of the largest herds of Royal Golden Guernseys in the country. But sort of they got in touch with us initially asking if we had any sites that would do for sort of goat management, and Nick and I previously discussed Cawthorn, and it had been previously grazed with sheep, but sheep are a little less good at taking care of the scrub, and that was sort of 10-15 years ago that the sheep were last on there. Cattle we considered as an option, but they're just too heavy, so they risk damaging the archaeology, and particularly within the camps where there's more sensitive earthworks. So yeah, it was just sort of quite a lucky chance that Nick and I have been discussing it recently, and then this request for some sites. So it's a little bit of a trial because it's quite a novel thing, sort of using goats for management of monuments. But I think, after the storms at the back end of last year, there were an awful lot of very large trees pulled out on the edge of the monument that really demonstrated that if you let these trees get to an appreciable size, if they are to fall, they can do irreparable damage. And it's just easy to deal with them whilst they're a little tree rather than a great big 2 foot across, 40 foot high thing. I mean, that also ties in nicely with the sort of conservation side of it, because all of the sort of open space up around Cawthorn is priority habitat, sort of lowland heath, lowland acid grassland sort of mosaic. And one of the methods of conserving that is keeping scrub to a low proportion. So conservation-wise, a small amount of scrub isn't a problem, but it's just the fact that it can proliferate so quickly. But yeah, it's got a nice sort of typical lowland heath species mix you would expect up there. So you've got sort of your ling heathers, bilberries, bell heather, crowberry, and things like tormentil. And we've also got a good population of spotted orchids as well in some of the grassier bits. That was the amazing thing with the goats, was how quickly they got on top of some of the area. We had one area that was bramble sort of up to the height of your knee for, maybe a 10 metre by 100 metre block. And within 2.5-3 weeks, the goats had it cleared and it was back to grass and open space for other plants to sort of try and colonise into that space. And this, we're hoping, will be perhaps an ongoing programme of having the goats on, because it's like Nick was saying, it's sort of an endless task with it being surrounded by woodland on all sides. There's always going to be scrub encroachment from those woodland edges, and it's just a case of just keeping on top of it before it becomes a major problem. Because, if we were to leave the site 50 years, you would go back and it would be much the same as the rest of the woodland surrounding it.
The goat experiment is going well then. Is it something you've discussed keeping? Or
I think we would like to, funding permitting, and I think the ultimate goal for this year is to try and produce something of a case study as a bit of a proof of concept to go, this has worked and it hasn't had any detrimental effects. Because if they were to get on and be doing a fantastic job with the scrub but also eroding all the archaeology, then that would be counter to the aims of the site. So it's the fact that they've been on, and with the exception of the scrub being gone, if you were to go there now not knowing the scrub was there, you probably wouldn't know the goats had been there. They haven't sort of left anything obvious to really spot, which is absolutely perfect. That's exactly the goal of it.
How many goats are there? Remind me, Jacob.
We've got 16.
Let's say, yeah, the herd is currently 16 on there, and they're moved around from different parts of the complex. I really don't consider that 16 goats is enough to cause any damage. Individually, they don't weigh very much at all. As Jacob says, they're not like cattle. They're not great big animals. They don't tend to scrub around on the ground surface very much, so that they've not caused any damage. Also, a great advantage, I just want to pick up on something Jacob said earlier, a great advantage of the no fence grazing with their collars, apart from the fact that you obviously don't have to put any fences in, is that we can, along with the mossy oaks, the goats owners, we can edit areas on an app where we don't want the goats to walk on. And albeit I've just said that I don't think they cause any damage, to be better safe than sorry in this first year experimental phase, we have kept the goats off of a couple of discrete areas within the forts, because within the forts there are some really very complex and quite delicate upstanding earthwork remains which probably relate to Roman campsites, possible medieval reuse of the site, important archaeology probably that we don't want disturbed. So we've kept the goats from walking on those areas, and it's as simple as drawing a circle on an app and they won't go there. It's fantastic.
What's the reaction been like to the new trail? Are you getting lots of feedback on it yet?
Yeah, it seems to be pretty sort of well received by the local community. There's a local Facebook group that have been quite positive. I think it's just, again, some good timing that it's tied in with the goats. So the goats had got attention to the site, and then the trail went in maybe 2 or 3 weeks after the goats were on. So it's primed the site for a little bit more attention from the local area. But it's already quite a popular site with residents of Pickering. So it's a really popular site for dog walkers and that, I think, because it's quite a nice, flat, easygoing route that's circular as well. So you're not going out and back on yourself. You can do a novel thing all the way around, which sort of adds to it. Visitors very welcome, but with there being goats on site, it is a dog-friendly site, but we ask people be responsible, dogs on leads at all times, please, particularly as they are on a no-fence system. They don't have a fenced area to be within. The goats are due to come off on the 15th of August. Okay. That's their last date for this year anyway. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we can get them back on.
For once, I don't have to say that I'd love to visit North Yorkshire. I've been there many, many times, seeing as I'm originally from East Yorkshire, but I've not visited that Roman site, and it sounds like I need to. It's a pity the goats are going on a vacation, but hopefully they'll be back next year. Next, it's to Peru, if only it was literally. Enrique Humbert at Mountain Lodges of Peru is an expert on vacations, and we had a great conversation about the latest holiday trend, which is the Coolcation, which basically means going on holiday to a cooler climate. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about your company and what you do there in Peru?
Yeah, sure. With Mountain Lodges of Peru, we've been around for about 20 years now. And what we managed to do is we've scouted and explored the Peruvian territory in order to try and seek the off the beaten path or the unvisited destinations and places, especially around the region of Cusco, that can offer travelers unique experiences, maybe more authentic experiences within the concept of adventure travel by offering them hiking, walking, trekking, horseback riding, and so forth experiences so that they can make their way where we know they want to go, which is Machu Picchu, as part of their trip, but in maybe ways that invite them to be open and receiving and having more authentic experiences, both with local communities as well as with different outdoor settings. And so for the last 20 years, we've developed and we offer a wide variety of different adventure travel experiences, ranging from like short 3-day visits to local communities up to 12-day epic treks from the main square in the city of Cusco all the way up to Machu Picchu in a combination of tents and camps. And we try to do this in a way that, or with the mission of including local communities and maybe communities that are just a bit off the beaten path, that have not been able to involve and engage with the development of tourism in Peru for the last few decades. We've managed to attract quite a following of people that are looking for these more alternative experiences, whilst managing to enjoy the destination and the main sites that they want to visit when they come to a country like Peru. Maybe the most popular program that we have now, and we have had for the past 20 years, is a lodge-to-lodge trek on other Inca Trail, which people don't know much about, which is called the Salcantay Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. And it's the only lodge-to-lodge trek to Machu Picchu at this time. And so that invites people to be in the outdoors, to have their adventurous experiences, and maybe enjoy some comfort and support and assistance along the way. That's the essence of what we do in Peru.
The reason for the conversation, I guess, was mainly to do with this new concept of Coolcations. And I wonder if you could maybe explain a little bit about what that is and what has brought that about.
I think Coolcations brings about a couple of different aspects. The first one is, of course, traveling to destinations that are cooler from a climate point of view. And I think that's always been a concept that has attracted travelers throughout history. Yeah. Because cooler places tend to be less visited. Yeah. It's just instinct based of humankind, right? We try to avoid more rugged, just instinctively, we try to avoid more rugged places. And cooler destinations often tend to be a bit more rugged, right? It requires a bit more effort to be in those places and to be well in those places, right? And so I think there's always been a sense of discovery and exploration associated with being in cooler destinations, because sometimes this can happen at higher altitude, and because this can happen in places where you do need to kind of engage in a different way with that destination. I think that's part of why these Coolcations and people wanting to travel to these destinations is a new trend. But at the same time, I think there's an element of thrill associated with discovery and exploration of these destinations. If you go there, you take the extra step of educating yourself in regards to the destination so that you can anticipate to have a better experience, number one. While visiting some cooler destinations, you may require like maybe more technical gear, even from clothing to other similar, elements. And so it requires maybe a higher level of engagement in visiting these destinations than visiting, for example, a sun and beach destination, right? Sun and beach destination, beautiful. Basically, you bring a swimsuit, maybe a towel, and you're set. When visiting cooler destinations, it may require you to go to your local gear outfitter and seek a technical parka or jacket, and see what fits. And it's part of the thrill of preparing to go to these destinations, and it blends into the experience itself. So I think Coolcations, in a sense, are presenting people with the opportunity of creating these more immersive, more well-rounded, full of different elements, experiences. And so I think there's quite a few elements in that. Of course, I think that as climate change, as people are becoming more educated with climate change, regardless of, your final position in regards to the cause, and source of climate change. There are the real tangible evidences of climate change. And as people begin to understand that there are certain landscapes and certain environmental assets that are being affected by climate change, and there's certain places that are just receding before our eyes, I think that will also drive people to visit these destinations, and at the same time, maybe even to educate themselves further within the topic. So I think there's a lot of element to Coolcations that makes it a trend now. And I don't think it's a thing that will go away, because I think these elements have always been associated with travel in a way. Today, it seems that even as younger generations start to engage more in travel from a global perspective, they're bringing these interests and showcasing them at the same time.
I'm in Europe, and a lot of people seem to be shying away from, especially in the UK, people would go to Spain in the summertime, but now they're going to other places because they're finding that Spain is too hot. Do you think that climate change is affecting people's travel vacation plans?
Climate change in regards to hot and summer months, coupled with accessibility, crowds, associated with other things, it's just a combination that is driving people away from certain destinations in certain times of the year. I think the weather has to do with it, but I think that people are saying, well, you know what? As we begin to explore, for example, shoulder season travel to certain destinations, maybe even summer destinations, shoulder season travel, we find more enjoyable weather, same enjoyable experience, less crowds. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think that peak summer months in Europe and other destinations are people are starting to avoid them for many reasons. I mean, costs go up. And if you add to that the weather is just changing in such a way that it does affect our travel experience, I think that's driving people to consider these Coolcations. I don't think it's one that will replace the other one definitively. I think people will seek to start combining their summer travel plans in creative ways. I see this happening globally, but I also see this happening with Peruvian travelers, yeah, traveling outbound. And I can see more and more families that are choosing, for example, out of the summer travel months, to spend maybe a week visiting the Chilean or Argentinian Patagonia, or even the region of Cusco within Peru, seeking to be in these alternative travel destinations in cooler climates. But then they'll combine it with maybe 5 days, and they will go to maybe a summer travel destination for a few days. And that's happening more and more.
And are you seeing any difference in the northern hemisphere? Are you seeing people saying, well, it'll be cooler in South America during our summer, so let's go to the southern hemisphere in the summer, and now you're seeing southern hemisphere tourists going to the north in their summer because it's cooler?
Yes. If we take particular travel markets like the US, for example, right? The US travelers traveling within the US during summer is maybe where all these issues that I've tried to describe are intensified and highlighted, right? Even if you decide to travel in the outdoors to the national parks and so forth, all these combinations of issues. And I think that people are starting to redefine what summer travel means. Does summer travel mean being in the sun, being at the beach and in the sun, or in the sun in the outdoors? And I think it does a bit, but unless you're considering traveling to destinations where there are extreme weather differences, for example, if in the summertime you do go as south as you can in the Chilean or Argentinian Patagonia, you're going to have that dramatic weather change. It's like scorching summer hot in the US, but it's the middle of winter time in the Chilean Patagonia. So that's the more extreme change. Otherwise, I mean, even if you travel during the summer, the Northern Hemisphere summer months, to places like Ecuador, Colombia, even certain parts of Peru and so forth, you're going to have more gradual weather changes to certain parts of Latin America. And so, yes, I do think that there are people that are saying, I'm gonna switch my summer vibes with the sun and being outdoors with extreme weather change because I want to have that more unique experience. I'm gonna go to the southern, most southern part of the Chilean Patagonia. And I think you may have people that are saying like we can still be in the outdoors, in the mountains, in not such an extreme cool climate, but we can be in a cooler environment and with less crowds and with all the enjoyable experiences of visiting a foreign country and maybe an exotic foreign country that you're not familiar with. And like famously within Latin America, the Brazilian travel market, the outbound Brazilian travel market, the Brazilian travelers, during their summer, it gets so hot that they do decide to travel to the Northern Hemisphere. And they famously, in their summer months, will escape the hot weather in Brazil, which people will be like, wait a second, Brazil is like, it's famous for that. And they will also escape and they will go, north and they will go to the US, which is a huge travel destination for them. But they've started to travel now in their summer months, in our summer months, also to like seeking snow and mountains in Europe, in France and in Italy and so forth. So I can see that happening both ways.
Yeah, and I think obviously this is a walking podcast, and a lot of it relates to if you live. We used to live in Nevada, and you couldn't hike in the summer because it was too hot. So you would either go up into the mountains, or you would find a state where instead of 46 degrees, it was only 28 or 30. We're starting to see, especially here in Europe, we're starting to see countries like Iceland, Sweden, Norway, they're advertising to a lot of these states and countries where, okay, if you want to go hiking, it's too hot. So come here and go hiking. So I'm wondering if there's a shift in the way that people are viewing going on an active vacation because they just can't do it in their own backyard, I guess.
Maybe the thought of like high season, low season, peak season, low season, whatever. As the travel industry, I think globally continues to grow and people want to travel more, and there's more people wanting to travel, right? And this is as we see countries like India and China start to travel outbound more, this is going to become a larger place of global travelers. But yeah, I think that these notions that we have, maybe traditional notions that we have of peak season and low season, I think there may start to be redefined, right? Because for example, here in Peru and in some other destinations, we do have in certain regions of Latin America, we have kind of a marked rain or rainy season. So maybe 3 to 4 months. In some countries and in some regions, it may be more months. But just the perception of what the experience and value of travelers is. And some people are starting to rename this as worldwide, just like the green travel season. Yes, rain is part of the green travel season. But then again, you have, high-tech gear, and it's so enjoyable. It's in fact, for the last 20 years that I've had the opportunity of traveling, worldwide. Whenever I've just encountered a destination in the low season or rain season, as long as you have the great gear and you're avoiding, whatever safety risks, of course. Um, but if you can manage that, then it's super enjoyable. I would even say it's more adventurous in a way. And so I think that may start to be redefined more globally.
Do you think it's an opportunity for countries like the Scandinavian countries and Peru, Chile to kind of not reinvent themselves, but put themselves on the travel map instead of Rio, Florida?
Yes. I mean, from my perspective, being in the adventure travel kind of side of the travel industry, one of the things that I think has marked a big shift within the travel industry in the last maybe 15 years or so is when traditional slash luxury travel has met with adventure travel. As the traditional and luxury travelers started to seek more authentic and unique experiences, they kind of encountered the world of adventure travel. And so now I think there is more willingness, more openness, and more familiarization with the concept of being adventurous and being in the outdoors, especially, and exploring like unique places and cultures and so forth. And so as travelers continue to be more open with these concepts, I think that places like the ones that you've mentioned have a great opportunity because that's exactly what we offer in the otherwise known traditionally as a low season or the cooler months or the wetter season or, the green. And so what you're offering travelers is a different type of experience instead of a experience that may be perceived as a lower value experience, which that was maybe in the traditional sense. These are amazing experiences, which offer maybe a more adventurous essence to them and a different, more unique view to certain places. So yeah, I mean, there may be a beautiful destination that from a landscape point of view is seen beautiful and you can take great pictures if it's sunny. But then again, experiencing that destination, if it's rainy slash snowy or snowed in, may be a unique experience in itself.
What are some of your favorite places to escape the heat and do some either adventuring, hiking, that kind of thing?
My main hobbies, and this is since I was a kid, but I'm a skier, snowboarder since I was very young. So one of the things that I enjoy the most is trying to find, spots for skiing and snowboarding. So I try to escape that's my cool part of my Coolcation, I would say, to different places. But of course, hiking is another prime hobby of mine, as well as horseback riding and so forth. So I've had the opportunity of traveling because of my engagement with my business. And most of the places that I get to travel to associated with my travel business, we actually get to these places in the shoulder season mostly. And it's probably like the shoulder rainy season or it's a shoulder cooler season with snow and so forth. And I have to tell you, I've been in places like Barichara in Colombia, which is probably amazing in the summertime. It's probably too hot for me, for my taste. But we were there, it must have been October, and it was kind of like rainy, and it was fresh and cool and beautiful and culturally authentic and these amazing spots all over the world that get completely unvisited in certain times of the year because of their cooler climate or rain or whatever it is. Some of my favorites have been visiting, for example, the Chilean, Argentinian Patagonia in the off season, where it is quite cooler, I would say, but there's nobody in the national parks. It's amazing. I mean, fortunately, I do have good gear and tech gear, and tech clothing and so forth. So it's not an issue for me, but I found it like most enjoyable and I found it really adventurous. I found the same thing within Latin America in the Chapada Diamantina in Brazil. And I went in the rain season and it was amazing. It comes alive in a certain way instead of being arid and dry, which it normally is during the summer months. Within Peru, my go-to is almost always Cusco because it's one of those destinations that even though it's famous for Machu Picchu, and we talked about this briefly, I had the privilege of living in Cusco for over close to 15 years, and I had the opportunity to explore Cusco much further outside the traditional, Cusco, Sacred Valley, Machu Picchu traditional itineraries. And I found magical places that, if visited in the off season, come alive in ways that don't during the summer season. I'm biased to Latin America because this is where I've established my roots. But worldwide, I do escape oftentimes to the US for skiing and snowboarding or to Canada. And sometimes in Europe, I have some friends in Austria. We go skiing over there as well and try to escape. A place that I've not been to yet, curiously, is part of Scandinavia, but some of the Scandinavian countries I still have to visit. And one of my goals for the past few years has been to visit some Scandinavian countries in the off season.
Do you think that this is just a trend, or do you think that people are going to start being more adventurous with their adventures?
I think that as a concept of travel, it's going to remain. The name may change, as has other strong pillars of the travel community changed over the years, like, the whole sustainability conservation, which used to be eco, travel, and then swifted and changed. It may have different names, but I think that because of its adventurous essence, because people are becoming more aware of climate change, because the travel industry is growing, people are going to seek alternative destinations and also visiting them in alternative parts of the season, yeah, or of their season. And I think that within that, Coolcations, meaning traveling to cooler destinations, is going to be a strong representation of that because it's in these environments that normally the adventurous essence is peaked, and it tends to be maybe a bit more unique and authentic. And of course, you get to enjoy the main characteristic, which is more manageable weather, if in relation to extreme hot weather.
It's probably cheaper as well, I would imagine, in shoulder seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. For example, here in Peru, during our summer months, which is our rain season in the Andes, in the mountains. Yeah. So during our December through March, we get a lot of Latin American travelers, younger Latin American travelers, because there's such a marked reduction in the price of travel or the cost of travel to destinations like Cusco and so forth, which is probably much less affordable for this, traveler during the peak summer months. As people start to travel more often, I think most of these things that we've talked about will come maybe organically. At this time, I think it's great that a concept like Coolcations is being, shared and prompted as a concept of travel, because under that concept, I think there's a lot of benefit, not only to the traveler in regards to the value of the travel experience and what they're going to get and the enjoyment of their travel experience. But I think that as an industry, it's going to allow for destinations that are not promoted in certain times of the year or that are not promoted at all to start promoting themselves and allow us to, better distribute and take people where they want to go instead of the, kind of like the bottleneck effect that we're having in certain places now. I think it's going to allow us to talk about climate change in relation to travelers and what they want to learn and pick up from the travelers. I think there is a in-person, in situ experience of actually seeing a glacier in front of you and maybe having a knowledgeable guide, say how he's experienced the changing landscape of that glacier in the last 30 years or 20 years. I think there's these very up and close personal experiences that travelers can have while traveling to cooler destinations as well. It has all the pillars to be a great concept, new concept of travel.
Sadly, South America is a continent I've not been to and would love to, regardless of the season. I was trying to think if Enrique is our furthest away guest, but then I remembered we did an interview in Hong Kong, so I'm not sure which one wins there. Probably Peru. Anyway, that's it for another podcast. If you have news or suggestions for podcast guests, please do get in touch via jim@walkingpost.com. I've been so busy catching up on work and failing miserably over the past couple of days, I've not even checked out the weekend forecast to see if the heat wave continues or not. If it's a fine sunny day, I'm sure we will be out on the last weekend before school restarts here. Amazingly, second day back, they're going on a trip. The irony there is it's to meet an author, which seems a bit odd as the school has never asked me to go in and talk to the students, in spite of having written 9 books so far. I guess as I'm just a parent, I don't count. But it means it's back to preparing a school lunch every day, and it'll be a quiet house, except when someone dares to walk by the house, which incurs the piercing bark of the dog, who managed to interrupt 2 interviews this week. In neither case was I fast enough on the mute button. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this week's WalkingPost.com podcast, and I hope that you have a great week, hopefully with a walk involved, and maybe in a cool location, or if not, at least one that has ice cream to cool down with. So, until next time, happy trails! Walking Post from WalkingPost.com is an Air Coastal Media Limited production.